2020 continues to be a struggle for Kyle Busch. Meanwhile, Brad Keselowski has emerged as the clear third favorite for the Cup Series title. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. Hope you all have had a good weekend. I just got done watching the Foxwoods Casino 301. That's a cool name, Foxwoods. New Hampshire Motor Speedway's one and only race on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. It was a topsy-turvy race. A lot of surprises involved, but when it was all said and done, it was some of the championship favorites battling it out down the stretch. And ultimately, it was Brad Keselowski kind of solidifying himself as a true championship contender. Most of the conversation up to this point this season has been about Denny Hamlin. Is this the year he finally wins a Cup Series title? Kevin Harvick, of course, won the title in 2014, has been a Championship 4 driver pretty much every year since then. The two of them have traded wins back and forth. They both lead the series in terms of total number of wins this season. But Brad Keselowski, a week ago, he called this quietly one of the best seasons of his Cup Series career. He just grabbed his third win of the season and did this one in dominating fashion at a racetrack that I must say is probably the closest thing we have on the schedule to Phoenix, which is of course the championship race in November. Something to keep in mind. Now, Denny Hamlin did finish second in this race and Kevin Harvick managed to get a top 5 coming back from kind of a bad pit strategy call early in the race. So the big three, if you will, and I know that conjures up for some people bad memories of 2018 when Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, and Martin Truex dominated that season. But that's kind of what we have once again here in 2020. It was up to this point sort of the big two, the dynamic duo, if you will, but put Keselowski on that list as well with the way he's run the last few weeks especially. Now in today's video we're going to talk about the top finishers, of course. We're going to talk about how this affects the playoff grid because there are a lot of drivers still battling for the final couple of playoff spots here down the stretch. And then of course at the end of this race I'll talk about the racing as a whole and we'll put this thing on the groovy gauge. It was great to have fans in the stands. This is only like the third race. I mean, Bristol had some fans. Talladega, Homestead, Miami had, a couple dozen fans each, I guess. But it was cool to see fans back in the stands here at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. And I was shocked to hear during his post-race interview, fans were chanting, "Brad, Brad, Brad." When Brad Keselowski won the race. I've been going to races for years, and I can't remember the last time Brad Keselowski got cheers from a NASCAR audience. This pandemic, man, people have absolutely lost their minds. Anyway, it was fun to see fans back in the stands. It sounds like they had roughly 12 to 15,000 fans at New Hampshire Motor Speedway today. Anyway, let's go and talk about the top finishers because there are some notable drivers that had solid days today. Also some notable drivers that had pretty awful days. He's not on this list, but finishing dead last today was Kyle Busch, the defending series champion. Early on in this race, like 15 laps in early, scraped the outside wall. A few laps later, blew a right front tire and absolutely shellacked the wall. Kyle Busch's day was done extremely early on. You gotta believe this was disappointing for Kyle Busch. The last 8 points paying races have all used the 550 horsepower package, which Kyle Busch, especially last year, was very vocal about how much he didn't like it. Finally go to a real racetrack, as Kyle Busch would likely call it, and he didn't even make it halfway through stage 1. Didn't even make it to the competition caution, unfortunately. Perhaps a result of no practice, because we saw later in the race other drivers like Matt Kenseth, Christopher Bell had multiple tire issues as well. But Kyle Busch must be leaving today feeling quite dejected, especially with Brad Keselowski getting the win. Kyle Busch still only has 1 playoff point to his credit. And with guys like Hamlin, Harvick, and now Brad Keselowski, who also won a stage today, racking up the playoff points by the dozen almost, Kyle Busch is in a huge hole right now for when the playoffs start, and it's going to be difficult at this rate for Kyle Busch to make it to the Championship 4. Kyle Busch has almost been a lock to make the Championship 4 since this format was introduced. But the way this year has gone as far as playoff points, it looks like Kyle Busch may find himself in a must-win scenario once we get to the round of 8. If Kyle Busch even makes it to the round of 8. Of course, things can happen, but certainly a big hole right now for the 18 team. A shocking change of pace from how they ran last year in 2019. Still winless here on the 2020 season, but anyway, he finished last. I also have to mention Matt Kenseth. I mention when Matt Kenseth does good things because I'm a big Matt Kenseth fan, but Matt Kenseth had maybe the most embarrassing race of his 18-19 year Cup Series career. He finished 1 spot better than Kyle Busch, and man, he's obviously in a must-win scenario. That's the only way he makes the playoffs at this point is by winning a race. He drove his way up into the top 15, was running 11th, I believe, when he spun out late in stage 2. Stayed on the lead lap, but then blew a tire, but it wasn't as bad as Kyle Busch's. He didn't really damage the car too bad, so seemed to be okay. Again, stayed on the lead lap, and then just a few laps later, blew another tire, hit the wall. Matt Kenseth basically parked it himself. He didn't even give his team an opportunity to fix the damage. He was just done at that point. A really tough season for Matt Kenseth. If I have to guess, I think Matt Kenseth is regretting coming out of retirement. And I'll be quite honest, as a Matt Kenseth fan, it has been a struggle to watch this year. No practice, of course, for a driver who hasn't been in these cars in a year and a half, certainly put Kenseth at a disadvantage. But after he ran 10th, his first race back, his first race since the pandemic, when they ran 10th in their first race together at Darlington, I thought big things were soon to come. Outside of his top 5 run at Indianapolis, it's been a pretty awful season for Matt Kenseth, a pretty sad season. Some of it's him, some of it's the team, some of it's the car, some of it's miscommunication. I mean, Matt Kenseth and Kyle Larson, the previous driver of the 42, have about as different of driving styles as you can possibly have in NASCAR, so making that change in the middle of a season with no practice was always going to be difficult, but man, this season is hurting Matt Kenseth's legacy. We talked about how Jimmy Johnson hasn't won a race in 3 years, and that might hurt his legacy. Matt Kenseth is still a Hall of Famer without a doubt, but goodness me. Remember 2017 when he went out winning in his second to last start, and people were like, dang, this Matt Kenseth guy, he was one of the best. We never noticed. He's underrated superstar. Between 2018 being kind of a mediocre season in that 6 car, and of course this year being just an absolute debacle in the 42 car, Matt Kenseth's last year and a half, 2 years in the Cup Series competition is not going to go down in history for the right reasons. But just want to get out there, so that out there, so you guys know that I'm fair. I can talk about the good and I can talk about the bad when it involves Matt Kenseth. But now let's focus on these top finishers. There's a few notable drivers. We've already talked about Brad Keselowski. Again, he dominated this race. It really came down to him and Denny Hamlin at many points. They had some great battles at the end of Stage 2, for example, and great battles at the beginning of Stage 3. But the race ended with a very long and, I'll be honest, kind of tedious green flag run, and Keselowski drove off. Hamlin never closed in. You look at the top 4, it's Penske versus Joe Gibbs Racing. Stewart-Haas Racing with Kevin Harvick, and you see Eric Almirola and Cole Custer, rookie, getting another top 10. Almirola keeps his top 10 streak alive. So once again, Penske, Joe Gibbs Racing, and Stewart-Haas, the 3 best teams today. It's the story of the entire season. Hendrick Motorsports, as you can see there, lagging a little bit further behind. That isn't to discredit some of those drivers that finished around 10th, 11th, 12th there. I mean, Tyler Reddick, Jimmy Johnson, William Byron are all right there on the playoff cut line. They all needed to have solid days, and more or less they did. I mean, when they're all finishing right next to each other, you know, guys like Johnson, Reddick aren't really making up a whole lot of points on William Byron, who's currently still the 16th place driver. We'll look at the points in just a second. But hey, Jimmy Johnson spun out early in the race. He had some contact with Clint Boyer. At that point, it looked like another race where Jimmy Johnson had a fast car and got taken out for some reason or another, but he bounced back and came back strong and actually ran up in the top 5 briefly late in this race before fading to 11th, 12th. I forgot Byron got him on the last lap. So not a catastrophic day for Jimmy Johnson, but certainly not as good of a day as he was hoping for. A driver who you don't see there in the top 20 regarding the points who did have a catastrophic day is Eric Jones. Eric Jones. He's in a contract year. I like Eric Jones, but I gotta say my excitement for Eric Jones is dwindling on a weekly basis at this point. Today, I don't know if it was a driver error or if it was a pit crew error because they never showed a replay on NBCSN, but early on in this race, he got a 1-lap penalty for pitting outside the box. I don't know if that means Jones went over the line or if like equipment sort of left the box and it was a pit crew error. I don't know whose fault it was, but all I know is that 20 team makes so many mistakes in and around pit road that they don't deserve to make the playoffs. I mean, they're terrible. And even after Eric Jones got his lap back, he ran 20th. He finished 24th, which is just abysmal for a driver who's just outside the top 16 in Joe Gibbs equipment who needs to make the playoffs this year. He just does. He needs to make the playoffs. If he doesn't make the playoffs this year, I'm not even going to be able to defend him anymore. He doesn't deserve to drive the 20 car. And I'm not just going to stop at Eric Jones. I think Chris Gale, I think that pit crew, which has basically been turned over more times than you can count just this season alone, that whole team needs to be blown up and rebuilt from scratch if they don't make the playoffs this year, especially when you have Denny Hamlin with 5 wins running in the top 5 every week. Martin Truex with a new crew chief is still running in the top 5 on a regular basis. Yes, Kyle Busch is having a down season, but he's still run up near the front and is still going to easily make the playoffs despite these catastrophic races like today. If that 20 team does not make the playoffs this year, or at least doesn't show some signs of life here these last 6 races, I guess, until the playoffs, I don't know, that just might be it for Eric Jones. He'll go somewhere else. He'll probably get another decent ride. It sounds like there could be another option available for him out there, but his time with Joe Gibbs Racing at that point, I think, honestly should be done. And you guys know, if you watch my show, I often defend Eric Jones quite a bit, probably more so than other people, but right now, that whole team is just letting me down on a weekly basis, and it's super, super frustrating to watch. Now, that's not to say Christopher Bell did much better today. Christopher Bell's the driver that many people think would replace Jones in the 20 should something happen there. Christopher Bell ran pretty good the first half of this race, but then tire issues, and they didn't really make up much track position even before he got damaged. still, Christopher Bell had a better day than Erik Jones today, without a doubt. He impressed me more than Erik Jones did, but the young Toyota drivers just can't seem to get any sort of positive momentum going. And again, it's not all them. I think today, largely it was the team's fault, but gosh, it's frustrating. Anyway, that's the top 20. Cole Custer, Tyler Reddick, 2 rookies getting top 10s. Cole Custer, if you look at his last 5 races, he has 4 top 10s, including that win at Kentucky. So Cole Custer they figured things out. So anyway, let's look at the point standings really quick because I want to talk about that just a little bit more. If we look at the playoff grid, Clint Boyer didn't have a great day, but he's still 43 points to the good. Matt DiBenedetto had a solid run. He's 40 points to the good. Both those drivers have a nice little cushion, perhaps. William Byron extended his lead over the playoff bubble. He's up to 15 points over 17th place. Tyler Reddick is 15 points back. Jimmy Johnson, 25. And Erik Jones, who I just talked about, is now 31 points to the bad. Looking at that, it seems clear that Jimmy Johnson's going to need to do better than 12th if he wants to make the playoffs this year. Obviously a win solves everything, but I haven't seen winning speed consistency out of the 48, so I don't see that happening right now at this rate. There are some wild card races coming up in a couple weeks. The Daytona Road Course is going to be insane. Of course, the Daytona Oval is the end of this month. It's the final race of the regular season. Anyone can win that. We're really not going to know what the playoffs look like until after that final race, and because there could be a huge change. Don't count out Ricky Stenhouse back in 23rd in points. There you have it. Those are the top finishers. Those are the point standings here with just 6 races to go, I believe, in the regular season. We got some double headers coming up at Dover and Michigan. That's going to be interesting. Anyway, let's talk about this race as a whole. We're going to put this thing on the groovy gauge in just a moment, but we got to talk about New Hampshire. Like I said earlier, this was the first race in almost 2 months to use the 750 horsepower rules package. And I'm not counting the All-Star race. Of course, the All-Star race did use this package as well. But this is the first points paying race, and it was a nice breath of fresh air. It was nice. I don't think they ever used the word aero push. They barely talked about air at all in this race, even though there are certainly times air came into play. Anytime you're working with big machines in close quarters going at high speeds, air is a factor, but it was nice to not hear them talk about aero in any significant way today. Of course, the PJ1 was used in both the lowest lane and the third lane, I guess, the outer lane at New Hampshire today, which created some interesting situations early on when drivers were slipping and sliding out of that stuff easy. Overall, the first 200 or so laps of this 301 lap race were fantastic. Some of the best racing I've seen at New Hampshire in a long time. I think the balance they struck with the PJ1, as well as some of the interesting tire strategy, which put slower cars out front of faster cars and forced, a lot of passing throughout the middle of the pack. There was a fantastic extended battle for the lead between, I believe it was Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, and I think Brad Keselowski, if I'm not mistaken, they raced for 30, 40, 50 laps, passing each other back and forth. It was fantastic. Absolutely phenomenal NASCAR Cup Series racing for a while there. Unfortunately, the race did end with kind of a dry 80, 90, 95 lap green flag run, where once Keselowski got to the lead, there really wasn't any concern that he was going to lose the lead. NBC tried to play up the fact that fuel was maybe a question, but I think they kind of spoiled that early on when they said fuel wasn't an issue, so fuel was not really a concern for anybody. The most interesting part of the last 50 or 60 laps was watching Kevin Harvick, who had to come from the back after early on in the race kind of getting on an off-sequence strategy and being forced to pit under green, losing a lap. He got back on the lead lap, and that final stage, slightly better tires, we saw Harvick just cut and carve his way through the entire field. That was enjoyable to watch. NBC did a pretty good job of showing his moves, and especially once he got into the top 10 or 12, they really showed pretty much all of his passes for position. So that was at least somewhat interesting to watch, because if fuel did come into play, we knew Harvick was going to be the guy to watch out for. So there were still some interesting things to watch late in this race, but overall it was an anticlimactic finish. But overall, I'd say much better racing at New Hampshire than I'm used to seeing. New Hampshire is kind of inconsistent. Adding the PJ1, and of course this year bringing back the low downforce rules package, certainly helped the track, certainly restored this track to some of its best days. So overall, if we put this thing on the groovy gauge, I'm going to give today's race at New Hampshire a 75%. It would have definitely been in the 80s if we'd had a little more intrigue, a little bit more drama down the stretch. I'm just being honest, the last 80, 90 laps were pretty boring. I'm glad at least the best driver in car all day got the win. I like it when the best teams are rewarded for their performances, but yeah, just not a lot going on. Bell had a flat tire in there, but didn't bring out a caution or anything, so I guess that was kind of dramatic, but yeah, it was fine. It was tough. The first 200 laps, and I'll keep saying this, was some of the best New Hampshire racing I've ever seen. I'll give this race a solid 75%. I'd say an overall pretty good race. Let me know what score you would give this race down in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. I feel like I've been kind of all over the place in this review, but I appreciate you all bearing with me. Of course, subscribe if you are new. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, And of course, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Couldn't do the show without your fantastic support over there on Patreon. If you also want to help support Out of the Groove and support the videos on this channel, you can check out that top link down in the description. I really appreciate it, you guys. Doubleheader at Michigan is less than a week away. Can't wait for that. I'll have plenty of videos up in the meantime later this week, so stay tuned for all of that. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you again very, very soon.